The first drop of rain came through the roof and struck the ledger square in the middle of a column of numbers. Clara Whitmore watched the ink feather outward like a wound opening. Another drop hit the table. Then another. By the time she moved the book aside, the kitchen smelled of wet pine, cold ash, and the sharp tannin of ruined paper. She set a pot beneath the leak, then another beneath the next. The cabin had belonged to her husband for 6 years, and to drink for longer than that. In life, he had promised repairs every spring. In death, he had left warped shingles, a sour mattress, and a note folded inside the flour bin. Payment due in 30 days, mortgage in arrears, outstanding account to Mercer Supply. There had been no signature on the paper because none was needed. Everyone in Dry Creek knew whose hand stood behind debts and foreclosures. Amos Mercer did not waste ink where fear would do. Clara read the note once more while rain drummed overhead. 30 days had become 4. She knew because she had crossed off each square on the calendar pinned near the stove. Her husband had been buried 26 days ago in a churchyard hard as brick, with 3 men present and 1 preacher in a hurry. A wagon rattled past outside, then stopped. She straightened. Widows learned the sound of hesitation on a road. It meant someone had business they disliked. Knuckles struck the door frame, not a neighbor's tap. Too hard for kindness. She opened it. The man on the threshold wore a duster darkened by rain and a hat low over his brow. Water ran from the brim in thin lines. He was broad through the shoulders, built like a gatepost sunk deep and long ago. Mud clung to his boots. He did not remove the hat. Mrs. Whitmore. His voice was level and spare, as if he had measured each word before spending it. Yes, I'm Eli Boone. She knew the name. Everyone within 20 miles did. Boone Ranch sat west of town where the grass ran mean and stubborn. Men said he had doubled his herd after the drought and buried half his laughter with his wife before that. They said he trusted horses more than people, and numbers less than both. What brings you here, Mr. Boone? He glanced past her shoulder at the pots catching rain. His jaw tightened once. Mercer sent me. The cold moved through her faster than the weather. Then you can tell him I have 4 days. He knows. Then why are you here? He took a folded paper from his coat and held it out, dry despite the rain. I came with terms. She did not take it at once. His hand was scarred across the knuckles, steady as timber, a working hand, not a collector's. When she unfolded the page, she saw legal phrasing, witnessed lines, and the county seal pressed faintly into wax. Marriage contract. For assumption of debt, transfer of lien, and temporary consolidation of adjoining grazing rights. The room went very quiet, except for rain-striking tin. She lifted her eyes. This is a joke. No. This. I am recently buried and poorly dressed, Mr. Boone. Perhaps that confused you. It didn't. Then explain. He stood in the doorway as if entering would cost him more than the storm. Mercer holds paper in your place. He holds paper on part of mine. If he takes your acreage, he cuts my north water path in half, come summer. If we marry, debts consolidate under one household claim. County delays seizure until review. Gives me time. Gives you time, she repeated, and gives you a roof that stays over your head. The bluntness landed harder for being plain. She looked back at the page. Her late husband's failings had narrowed her choices one bottle at a time, yet she had not expected them to end in this doorway with a stranger made of rain and silence. You propose matrimony as a fencing strategy. I propose survival. I have known one husband already. I do not seek another, neither do I. Something in that answer, flat, unadorned, almost weary, kept her from slamming the door. How long? 1 year, or until debts are cleared and Mercer's claim broken. And after? You're free. She ought to have laughed. Instead, she studied him. No greed in his face, no softness either. A man naming weather, not making promises. Behind him the rain sharpened. Water began to run under the sill. He noticed it, stepped inside without asking, and shoved his shoulder against the swollen door until it shut tight. The movement was practical, nothing more, yet the kitchen suddenly seemed smaller with him in it. He looked once around the room, at patched curtains, at the empty wood box, at the ceiling drip striking the pot. When did you last eat? The question offended her more than the contract. That is no concern of yours. It becomes mine if you faint signing county papers. I have not agreed. No. He met her gaze at last. His eyes were gray, colder than the rain. But you're counting options. She hated that he was right. Clara set the paper on the table and moved to the stove so he would not see her think. There was half a heel of bread and beans, enough for one meal. Pride had poor flavor, but often filled a plate. What do you gain besides grass? She asked. A legal household. That cannot be all. He took longer to answer. The town talks less when a man's house has a wife in it. So there had been gossip, perhaps about the dead woman, perhaps about the solitary rancher who worked men hard and never attended dances. Towns fed themselves on guesses. And what do I gain besides delayed ruin? His gaze drifted to the roof again. Dry sleep. Food. My name on the door instead of Mercer's lock. She turned. Your name already comes with conditions. Everything does. The rain eased to a steady patter. Somewhere a loose shutter knocked in the wind. Clara had once married for hope and buried debt instead. The memory of that mistake stood beside her now like a second shadow. Yet hope was not what this man offered. He offered terms, fences, days bought back from a ledger. There was honesty in that severity. If I say no, I leave. He paused. Mercer comes after. No embellishment, no threat, just sequence. She thought of sleeping in a borrowed room while strangers sorted her possessions into piles. She thought of winter coming with no place to meet it. She thought of how tired she was of being at the mercy of men who smiled while they took. She picked up the pen. His attention sharpened, though he did not move. I will have conditions of my own, she said. Name them. No drink in the house. Done. My late husband's tools remain mine. Done. I keep accounts, full accounts. If I am tying my life to debt again, I will see every figure. For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not warmth, recognition. You know ledgers? I know numbers enough to tell when a man is hiding behind them. A beat passed. Done, he said. She signed. The pen scratched louder than rain. When she finished, he stepped forward, added his own name in a hard, decisive hand, then folded the paper and tucked it inside his coat. That's it? She asked. That's it. No vows. No preacher. County clerk tomorrow. She almost smiled at the poverty of romance in it. Almost. He lifted one of the pots and poured the collected rainwater outside. Then he set it back beneath the leak. You'll need packing, he said. I have one trunk. Bring what matters. And if I cannot tell the difference anymore? His hand rested briefly on the back of a chair, scarred fingers against worn wood. When he answered, his voice was quieter than before. Then, bring what you'd mourn. He turned for the door. Mr. Boone. He paused. What if I prove inconvenient? The brim shadowed his face again as he opened the door to the wet gray afternoon. Mrs. Whitmore, he said. I expected. Then he walked into the rain, leaving boot prints on her floorboards and a marriage behind him like weather already arrived. By dawn, the rain had passed, leaving the yard a field of slick mud and the air smelling of wet earth and cedar bark. Clara stood beside her single trunk while the church bell in town struck 6 thin notes through the mist. Everything she owned fit into one box, 2 blankets, a crate of kitchen pans, and the stubborn little clock that had never once kept proper time. The cabin behind her looked smaller than it had the day she entered it as a bride. Grief had a way of shrinking places after it was done with them. Eli Boone arrived with no greeting and no wasted motion. His wagon rolled to the gate, broad wheels hissing through the mud. 2 bay horses leaned into their harness with patient strength. He climbed down, tied the reins, and lifted the trunk as if it held kindling instead of a woman's remaining life. You travel light, he said. I was made to. He set the trunk in the wagon bed. We need to reach the clerk before noon. There was no hand offered when she climbed aboard. She did not expect one. She gathered her skirts clear of the wheel and seated herself on the plank bench. He took the reins, clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward. The road to Dry Creek wound between cottonwoods still dripping from the storm. Water stood in ruts deep enough to drown a boot. They rode in silence, except for Harness Creek and the distant cry of crows. Clara studied the man beside her in profile. Rain had left his dark hair damp where it touched his collar. A pale scar ran from the hinge of his jaw toward his ear and disappeared beneath stubble. His hands on the reins were rough and sure. Nothing in him suggested ease. "You did not ask if I slept," she said at last. "You would have said yes, whether true or not. That is an arrogant assumption. It is a correct one." She looked away before irritation could show itself as interest. Fields rolled past, patched green and brown under a clearing sky. Somewhere out there lay the ranch that now waited for her under another woman's ghost. "Your wife," Clara said. "How long has she been gone?" The reins shifted once in his grip. 3 years. Children would have been the next question in polite company. She did not ask it. The polite company had never saved anyone. The town rose from the plains in stages, first smoke from cook fires, then the church steeple, then weathered storefronts crouched along the main road. Dry Creek was little more than a stubborn row of businesses pretending permanence. Mud swallowed wagon wheels. Men in hats turned to watch them pass. Women paused on boardwalks with baskets at their elbows. Recognition moved through faces faster than speech. Widow Whitmore, Boone Ranch, one wagon. By the time Eli drew up before the county office, the town already knew. The clerk was a narrow man with spectacles and ink on 2 fingers. He read the contract twice, then peered at Clara as though searching for signs of coercion. "You enter this arrangement willingly, ma'am?" "No," she said, but with clear understanding. The clerk blinked. Eli's mouth almost changed shape. "Almost." "That will suffice," the clerk muttered. They signed again in a heavier book than the first. The clerk stamped papers, tied them with ribbon, and pronounced them husband and wife with all the passion of a man totaling grain receipts. When it was done, Clara waited for some shift in the room, some trumpet of consequence. Nothing came. Only the scratch of another pen at another desk. Eli gathered the documents. "We're finished." A woman near the door whispered to her companion, not quietly enough, "He marries fast for a man who mourned so loudly." The companion answered, or not loudly enough. Clara felt heat rise to her throat. She had worn widowhood less than a month and already stood measured by strangers. Before she could move, Eli turned. The office stilled. He did not raise his voice. "If either of you has business with my household, bring it to me plain. If not, keep your mouths occupied elsewhere." No one answered. The whispering woman looked suddenly devoted to her gloves. He faced forward again, as if nothing had happened. "Come on." Outside, the town's noises returned in a rush, horses snorting, hammer blows from the smithy, a child laughing somewhere down the street. Clara kept pace beside him on the boardwalk. "You did not need to do that," she said. "Yes, it will only feed talk. It will redirect it." He stopped at the mercantile and tied the horses. Mercer Supply occupied the largest corner building in town, painted red once and now fading toward rust. Inside, shelves climbed the walls with flour sacks, lamp oil, nails, coffee, bolts of cloth, and every necessity a person could owe money for. Amos Mercer stood behind the counter, thick through the middle, beard trimmed close, smile narrow as a cut. Boone. His eyes slid to Clara. Mrs. Whitmore, or should I say Mrs. Boone now. "You should say paid," Eli replied, placing the county packet on the counter. Mercer opened it, scanned the top page, and his smile thinned further. Temporary consolidation, clever use of law, still law, for now. Mercer folded the papers carefully. Debt remains, interest remains. A wife does not mend arithmetic. "No," Clara said before Eli could speak, "but proper bookkeeping does." Mercer's attention shifted to her with mild surprise, the kind men reserved for furniture that had spoken. "Does it?" "It does when charges appear twice in one season for the same seed lot." Silence fell around the nearest barrels. She had studied every note in the flour bin by candlelight, every figure copied in a hand meant to intimidate more than clarify. Mercer's smile vanished. "You accuse me of fraud?" "I state what I read." Eli looked at her then, sharply. Mercer leaned both palms on the counter. "Careful, madam. Numbers are a trade. So is bluffing. For one long second, no one moved. No one. Then Mercer gave a soft laugh lacking humor. You'll find marriage changes many ambitions, and you'll find widowhood sharpened mine. Eli set a hand on the counter between them, not touching her, not touching Mercer. A boundary made visible. We're done here. He bought flour, salt pork, lamp oil, and a box of nails. Paid cash for each item. Mercer named the total without looking at Clara again. Out on the boardwalk, Eli loaded the sacks into the wagon. You should have let me speak, he said. You were occupied purchasing nails. You challenged a man who can make trouble. He already had. He tied down the load with 2 quick knots. You always this determined? Only when spoken around. Something unreadable crossed his face. Respect, perhaps. Annoyance. They wore similar coats on him. They left town under a noon sun breaking through cloud. The road west climbed gradually into harsher country. Grass thinned, wind moved freer. Fences ran long and tired over the land. By mid-afternoon, the ranch appeared on a rise, a broad house with weathered boards silvered by years, a barn leaning slightly at one corner, corrals beyond, and pasture stretching farther than her eye could hold. It looked exactly like what it was, a place built by labor and kept alive by refusal. 3 ranch hands paused near the water trough to stare as the wagon approached, one older, one bearded, one hardly more than a boy. Eli climbed down. This is Mrs. Boone. No one knew where to place their eyes. The older man spat aside and touched his hat. Ma'am. I'm Harlan. The boy nearly tripped doing the same. Kitchen stocked some, Eli said to Clara. Your room's upstairs. Your room, not ours. She stepped from the wagon. The wind carried horse sweat, sun-warmed dust, and the faint sweetness of hay from the barn loft. It was a rough country, honest in its severity. As she turned toward the porch, a section of gutter tore loose above her with a scream of rusted metal. Move. Eli hit her shoulder with both hands. She stumbled clear as the gutter crashed where she had stood, nails spraying across the yard like shot. One jagged end struck Eli's forearm and ripped a dark line through his sleeve. The ranch hands shouted and ran forward. Clara caught herself against the wagon wheel, breath gone. Eli was already upright, already pushing the metal aside with his boot as blood ran down to his wrist. It's nothing, he said. But when he looked at the roof, the house, then at her, she saw something rare crack through the control. Worry. Blood darkened Eli's shirt sleeve in a steady line before it began to drip from his fingertips into the dust. The ranch hands gathered around him with the helpless energy of men eager to be useful and uncertain how. It needs binding, Harlan said. It needs work finished, Eli answered. It needs both, Clara said. All 4 men turned toward her. She was already crossing the yard. Kitchen, she told Eli. I said it's nothing. And I said kitchen. There was a quality to command that did not depend on volume. She had used it on drunken excuses, unpaid invoices, and once on a mule determined to die in a ditch. It served her now. He held her gaze for a beat, then walked toward the house without another word. The kitchen was larger than the one she had left, with a cast-iron stove, long scrubbed table, deep basin sink, and shelves lined in practical abundance. The room carried old scents layered into the wood, coffee grounds, bread yeast, smoke, onions, winters of stew. Someone had swept recently. No one had arranged flowers. Sit, she said. He sat in the nearest chair with visible reluctance. She found a kettle, filled it, set it over flame, then opened drawers until she located clean cloth, needle, thread, and whiskey, meant for wounds rather than pleasure. Her hands moved quickly because they had learned to. Her mother had doctored neighbors when doctors were too far and too dear. You know medicine too, you, Eli asked. I know what distance teaches women. She cut away the sleeve. The gash was long but shallow, torn by jagged tin rather than punctured. His forearm was corded with muscle, browned by years of weather, marked by older scars crossing newer ones. Hold still. I am holding still. You are bracing to object. That nearly drew the corner of his mouth upward. Nearly. She poured whiskey over the wound. He did not flinch, though the tendons in his jaw stood hard. You can curse, she said. No need. Pride is a poor anesthetic. It's available. She threaded the needle and bent close. Heat from the stove touched one side of her face, while a cool draft from the ill-fitted window touched the other. His skin smelled of horse leather, clean sweat, and iron. She placed the first stitch. Outside, hammers began striking where the hands had dragged the fallen gutter aside. "You've done this before," he said after a moment. "My husband once split his scalp open trying to saddle a horse he could not stand. And you stayed." The words were plain. Their weight was not. She tied off the stitch. "Where was I to go?" He said nothing. 3 days passed in work measured by necessity rather than comfort. Clara learned the ranch by walking it. The pump handle stuck in cold mornings. The pantry latch needed lifting before it would close. One hinge on the back door cried like an injured bird. The hens escaped through a gap in the wire if left unwatched. Nothing here was ruined. Everything required attention. So did the accounts. On the second evening, she carried ledgers to the kitchen table after supper. Eli paused in the doorway, hat in hand, watching her stack books beside the lamp. "You mean to start tonight?" "I mean to start late. These should have been opened months ago." He crossed to the wash basin and scrubbed dust from his hands. "Harlan keeps a tally of feed. Harlan writes like a man falling downhill." "That's fair." She opened the oldest volume. Figures lurched across pages in 3 different hands. Purchases lacked dates. Cattle sales were entered twice in 1 month and absent in the next. Interest notes from Mercer multiplied like weeds. "You run a large operation," she said, "with records fit for a card table." It kept running. On weather and stubbornness, perhaps. He dried his hands slowly. "You always this kind?" "Only with numbers." He should have left then. Instead, he pulled out the opposite chair and sat. The movement altered the room more than speech could have. Lamplight caught in the rough grain of the table between them. "For the herd count," he said, tapping one page. 32 head were sold east, not 12. Ink blot hid the 3. She looked up. "You can read ledgers. I can read enough to know I dislike them." For the next hour, they worked in a rhythm neither acknowledged. She corrected columns. He supplied memory. She marked dates. He named buyers, storms, losses, births, fence breaks, and one black heifer mean enough to merit her own notation. Outside, wind moved around the house in long, low breaths. When she reached the mortgage page, her pencil stilled. Mercer had charged transport fees on goods collected in person, twice, added storage to seed never stored, applied interest before due dates. "He has been bleeding you." "I know." "No, you suspected. Now we know." She turned the book so he could see each entry, aligned beneath the next. His expression changed by degrees as understanding hardened into anger. "Can it be proved?" he asked. "With copies from his own invoices, witness dates, and to anyone willing to swear where goods were taken." The town doesn't like swearing against Mercer. The town may like being robbed less. He leaned back, studying her as if she were another difficult terrain feature the ranch had suddenly produced. "You didn't tell me this at the cabin. You did not ask what I was capable of." A silence followed, not empty this time. Then he said, "Clara." The use of her name landed with strange force. First time. No title between them. She kept her eyes on the ledger, because she did not know where else to place them. By the 4th morning, she was in the barn before sunrise, sleeves rolled, apron tied, helping the boy ranch hand, Tommy, coax a laboring cow through a hard calving. The air inside was warm with animal breath and sweet hay, sharp with manure and blood. Lantern light swung from a beam. "She's been at it all night," Tommy said, voice high with worry. Clara knelt beside the heifer, soothed her flank, checked position, and found one foreleg turned wrong. "We need rope, clean water, and someone stronger than you." Tommy bolted. The cow bawled and kicked. Clara kept one hand steady on the trembling hide. Eli arrived moments later, coat half-buttoned, rope in hand. "What happened?" "Calf's caught. When I say pull, pull smooth. Not hard." He dropped to one knee opposite her without argument. Together they worked in grunts, breath, and instruction. Her hands turned the leg. His strength held tension, exact and patient. The heifer strained. Clara counted. Eli pulled. A wet, heavy body slid free into the straw. For one suspended second, nothing moved. Then, the calf coughed. Tommy whooped so loudly pigeons burst from the rafters. Clara laughed before she could stop herself, real laughter, rusty from disuse. She looked up and found Eli watching her, not the calf. Something unreadable passed through his face. Wonder, perhaps, at hearing joy in his own barn. He stood first and offered a hand slick with birthwater and straw. She stared at it long enough to make the gesture dangerous. Then she took it. His grip was warm, firm, and brief. Yet when he released her, the place where their palms had met seemed to remember. That afternoon they rode into town for supplies. Clara had requested bolts for the gutter, lamp wicks, and proper paper. Eli said nothing about expense. At the Mercantile, conversation dimmed as they entered. Amos Mercer stood near the scales. Boone. Mrs. Boone. Settling in? Improving, Clara said. Mercer's gaze flicked to the list in her hand. Careful with ambition. Ranches swallow capable women the same as foolish men. Eli moved to the hardware shelf, selecting bolts with deliberate calm. Clara stepped to the counter. Then it is fortunate I have no intention of being swallowed. Mercer smiled thinly. You speak boldly for someone living under borrowed timber. She set a ledger page before him, marked entries circled in neat pencil. You overcharged transport on seed collected by Harlan Pike on April 12th. He signed the gate log at Boone Ranch before noon that day. The nearest customers stopped pretending not to listen. Mercer did not touch the page, meaningless scratches. Then produce your originals at County Review. His eyes sharpened. Review? Eli returned to her side, bolts in hand. We'll be requesting one, he said. The Mercantile went silent enough to hear the wall clock tick. Mercer's smile came back slower than before. Careful, Boone. Men who stir mud often sink in it. Eli set coins on the counter, then stand clear. They left with their parcels and half the town staring after them. In the wagon, Clara exhaled only when Dry Creek fell behind. He'll answer, she said. Yes. Are you afraid? He gathered the reins. Wind lifted a strand of hair across his brow. Yes. She had not expected the truth to be so plain. Good, she said quietly. So am I. And for the first time since the arrangement began, fear felt less like solitude. A week into their arrangement, the house had begun to sound different, not quieter, busier. Cabinet doors no longer slammed because Clara had tightened their hinges with spare screws found in a coffee tin. The back step no longer groaned because Eli replaced the split plank before dawn one morning and said nothing of it. The kitchen clock still lied about the hour, but now it lied from a shelf scrubbed clean and level. Boots lined the wall instead of drifting across the floor. Bread rose beneath a cloth near the stove. Order had arrived in small practical increments and taken root before either of them named it. Clara stood at the sink with sleeves rolled past her elbows, washing mud from jars saved for preserves. Outside, wind dragged dust across the yard in low sheets. Summer was creeping closer in the hard way it did on the plains, less by heat than by the absence of softness. Tommy burst through the back door without knocking. Mrs. Boone, Harlan says the south fence is down and 3 steers are loose. She dried her hands. Where is Mr. Boone? North pasture. I'm enough closer than north pasture. The boy blinked. Ma'am, get rope. By the time they reached the south line, 2 steers had wandered into a wash, and the third was considering greater sins. The fence lay flattened where an old cottonwood branch had fallen in the night. Tommy looked from the cattle to Clara with naked doubt. She took the rope from his hands. You ride wide and circle left. Make noise, not panic. What'll you do? The useful part. He grinned despite himself and kicked off. Clara climbed the broken rails, boots sinking in powdery dirt. She moved toward the lead steer at an angle, voice low and steady, using the same tone one used with frightened animals and proud men. The beast tossed its head, then paused. She slipped the loop over one horn, tightened, and turned its weight against itself. When Tommy came driving from the left, the steer chose the open gate exactly as she intended. By the time Eli arrived at a gallop, all 3 animals were back inside, and Clara was dragging branches off the fence line with her skirts tucked at the waist. He swung down from the saddle. What happened? Fence failed, she said. Then it improved. Tommy laughed outright. Eli looked from the secured steers to the rope in her hands to the repaired temporary tie she had fashioned with wire and stubbornness. You should have waited. For you? For help. I had some. She nodded toward Tommy, who straightened 2 inches. The wind snapped through the grass between them. Eli's gaze rested on her face longer than necessary. Then he took the branch from her hands. Go wash. I'll finish. I am capable of branches. I know. The words were quiet, more intimate than praise. That evening, Clara carried cooled biscuits to the table and found a small parcel beside her plate. Brown paper, twine. She looked at Eli. He cut meat with steady attention. Open it. Inside lay a pair of work gloves, sturdy leather, lined soft at the wrists. For the fence? She asked. For splinters. You bought these in town? Yes. You remembered my size, I guessed. She turned one glove in her hands. No speech rose ready enough to trust. I had gloves before, she said finally. These have fingers left. Tommy snorted into his potatoes. Harlan coughed to hide a smile. Eli did not look up. Eat. The room warmed with more than stove heat. 2 days later, Clara rode alone into Dry Creek with eggs to sell and a list in her pocket. The town wore midday dust and the smell of hot boards. Women crossed the street in pairs. Men leaned outside the barber with hats tipped low. News traveled faster than horses here, and she felt it turning toward her as she tied her mare at the hitching rail. At the Mercantile, Amos Mercer was absent. His sister, Mrs. Vale, kept the counter with lips pursed to a permanent grievance. Flour, yeast, and lamp oil, Clara said. Mrs. Vale weighed her with one glance. Cash? Of course. How modern. Clara laid coins on the wood. How transparent. The older woman wrapped the flour sack too tightly and let it drop near the edge where it split open in a pale spill across the floorboards. Several customers turned. My, Mrs. Vale said. Clumsy hands. Clara knew deliberate malice when she saw it. She also knew humiliation sought witnesses. She bent, gathered the torn sack, and said evenly, You'll replace what your grip destroyed. Mrs. Vale drew herself up. This store extends charity where it chooses. The bell over the door rang. Bootsteps crossed the boards behind Clara. She paid, Eli said. No volume, no heat. Yet the room seemed to brace around the sound. Mrs. Vale's color rose. I was speaking to her. You are now speaking to me. The barber outside had gone still enough to listen through glass. Mrs. Vale reached for another sack with stiff motions. Take it then. Eli stepped forward first, lifted the flour, then took the other parcels from Clara's arms as if he had done so all his life. When they were outside, she faced him beside the wagon. I did not require rescue. I know. Then why come in like thunder? I came for nails. She stared. He held up a paper packet from his coat pocket. It was possible he told the truth. It was also possible he had crossed town because some instinct in him had tightened at her absence. She could not tell which troubled her more. They rode home under a sky gone copper with late light. Halfway there, a wheel dropped hard into a rut. Clara pitched sideways. Eli caught her by the waist before she struck the bench. His hand spanned almost the breadth of her side. Neither moved. The horses slowed of their own accord. Dust drifted golden around them. The plains stretched empty in every direction, giving privacy by vastness. You can let go, she said, though quietly. Yes, he did not. Then, as if waking, he withdrew and gathered the reins again. They finished the ride in silence, thick as the weather. That night the wind changed. By midnight it was slamming shutters and driving grit through every crack in the house. Clara rose to secure the kitchen latch and found Eli already there, bracing the door with one shoulder while fastening the bar. Storm? She asked. Bad one. The lamp flame jumped wildly. From the yard came the sharp report of timber breaking. The barn, he said. He reached for his coat. So am I, Clara said. No. Yes. He looked at her in the swinging light, measuring the argument against time. Another crash sounded outside, horses screaming now. He shoved a spare coat into her arms. Stay behind me. Rain hit like thrown gravel the moment they stepped into the dark. Wind tore breath from the mouth. Mud sucked at their boots. The barn doors banged half open on broken hinges. Inside, chaos reared and kicked. Lantern light swung madly from a peg. One beam had split above the center stall and sagged low across the aisle. Two horses fought their tethers in panic. "Take the bay mare!" Eli shouted. "Cut her loose and lead left." He plunged toward the fallen beam. Clara ducked under flying hooves, knife out, hands steady despite the thunder in her chest. Rope parted. She caught the mare's halter, murmured into the hot wild ear, and pulled. Behind her, wood groaned like a living thing. She turned. The cracked beam had dropped farther, and Eli was beneath it. The lantern struck the wall and went out. Darkness swallowed the barn whole, except for lightning slicing, white through gaps in the boards. In those brief flashes, Clara saw Eli on one knee beneath the beam, shoulders wedged under splintered timber, while a trapped gelding thrashed against its stall. "Move the mare," he shouted. She dragged the bay horse clear and slapped its flank toward the open doors. Rain and wind took it into the yard. The next flash showed the beam slipping lower. Clara ran back. I set out. And I said no. She dropped beside the broken support, mud and straw soaking through her skirts. The timber was heavier than reason. She braced both hands beneath it and pushed. Pain shot through her wrists. "On 3, she said. "We don't have 3. Then take 2. They heaved together. The beam rose an inch. Enough. Eli lunged for the gelding's knot, cut the rope, and shoved the horse backward. It bolted free, striking sparks from the stall gate. The beam crashed down where its shoulder had been. "Now out," Eli said. A scream came from the far side of the barn. "Tommy?" The boy had come through the storm after them. Lightning flared again. At the rear loft ladder, Tommy crouched white-faced while feed sacks slid from above. Another support had cracked, pinning the ladder at an angle. Clara was already moving. Eli caught her arm. "Roof's going." So is the boy. She tore free and ran low through the aisle. Dust and rain mixed in the air like smoke. Tommy's hands shook so badly he could not descend. "Look at me," she said, reaching the ladder. "Not the roof. Me. It's breaking." "I know. Put your foot where I tell you." A board snapped somewhere overhead. She climbed 2 rungs toward him, took his boot and set it lower. Then the other. Slow as prayer. Fast as danger. When his weight shifted onto her shoulder, the loft groaned. "Jump," she said. He did. She caught enough of him to turn the fall. They hit the straw hard. A force like thunder split the barn behind them. Eli seized both by their coats and dragged them through the side door as half the loft collapsed in a roar of timber, hay, and years of labor. They sprawled in the mud outside while rain hammered their backs. Tommy sobbed once from shock, then clung to Clara like a child younger than he wished to be. She held him until the shaking eased. Eli rose first, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his ribs. "The horses?" "Loose," Clara said. "The barn?" They all looked. One side still stood. One side leaned toward ruin. "Damn it," he said softly. It was the first curse she had heard from him. Morning found the storm gone and the ranch altered. Fences lay flat in 2 pastures. The creek had cut a new channel through the lower field. The barn stood wounded, roof half open to a pitiless blue sky. Wet hay steamed in the sun. Men from neighboring spreads rode in to help because disaster on the frontier ignored grudges when it pleased. Mrs. Dobbins came too, broad-hatted and broad-minded, carrying biscuits wrapped in cloth and opinions no one had requested. She set the bundle on the kitchen table, eyed Clara's torn skirt, then Eli's bruised jaw. "Well," the older woman said, "you two look married now." Clara nearly choked on her coffee. Mrs. Dobbins only sniffed. About time, hardship did what ceremony could not. Outside, hammers began again. For 3 days they worked from first light until the stars showed. Clara organized salvage, counted usable boards, rationed feed, and set neighbors to tasks before they could invent slower methods. Eli rebuilt braces, reset posts, and climbed where no sensible person would let him. Tommy followed both with worship divided evenly. By the 3rd evening, Eli came in late with dust in every line of him and blood seeping through his shirt near the ribs. Clara set down the kettle. "What happened?" "Caught a nail." "Sit. It's shallow. So is your judgment." He sat. She unbuttoned the torn shirt before either of them had time to consider the act. Beneath it, his chest was broad and scarred, one side already purpled from the beam in the barn. A fresh puncture marked the lower ribs. Her fingers paused only once. "You hesitate now?" he asked. "I assess where to inflict pain most effectively." That sounds familiar. She cleaned the wound with warm water. His skin tightened under her touch. The kitchen was closed with summer heat and the smell of soap, iron, and bread cooling on the counter. You should rest tomorrow, she said. No, you're not made of oak. No. Then why answer like it? He looked down at her bent head, then away. Because if I stop moving, I think. The honesty was so abrupt it left no room for defense. She tied fresh bandage around his middle, hands circling him once, twice. Her knuckles brushed his back. He drew breath sharply. Did I hurt you? No, but his voice had changed. When she finished, neither stepped back. The room held still around them, stove ticking, clock lying, wind faint at the eaves. His hand lifted an inch, as if to touch her face, then dropped. He stood and took his shirt from the chair. Thank you, he said. She hated how much the smallness of those words moved her. That night she lay awake under the sloped ceiling of her room, listening to boards settle. Through the open window came sage on the breeze and distant hammering from some neighbor finishing his own repairs by moonlight. A knock sounded at her door. She sat up. Yes? The door remained closed. It's me, Eli said from the hall. Her pulse behaved foolishly. I gathered that. Silence. Then Mercer sent notice. The foolishness vanished. What notice? County Review denied. She rose and opened the door. He stood in the dim hall lamp, shirt half-buttoned, face carved harder than usual. Denied? She said. On what grounds? Missing supporting records. I filed them myself. They never arrived. Understanding came cold and clean. He intercepted them, or bought someone who could. She stepped into the hall fully, anger waking sharper than fear. Then we file again. He'll block again. Then we go above Dry Creek. That means Carson County seat. 2 days each way. Then hitch the wagon. He watched her for a long moment, as if some private measure had tipped. You don't tire, he said. I do. I simply proceed tired. Something like admiration moved through his eyes before being hidden. We leave at dawn. He turned to go. Eli. He stopped. We can win this. He stood with one hand on the banister, shoulders broad in the low light. I know, he said. That's what scares me. After he left, Clara closed the door and leaned against it, because she understood at last. It was not the case alone that frightened him. It was having something to lose if they won. They left before sunrise with 2 horses, a wagon packed light, and enough provisions to offend comfort but satisfy necessity. The plains wore dawn in pale bands of silver and blue. Frost still clung to the grass in shaded hollows, though the day promised heat later. Clara sat beside Eli, wrapped in a coat too large for her. It smelled faintly of leather, cedar smoke, and him. Tommy had tried to volunteer for the journey and been refused with such firmness he nearly wept. Harlan would mind the ranch. Mrs. Dobbins had promised to mind Harlan, which seemed the greater protection. The road east toward Carson County cut through open country where distance made honesty of everything. There were no town walls to hide behind. No porches full of watchers, only miles of rutted earth, low scrub, and sky broad enough to humble grievance. Clara reviewed papers in her lap as the wagon rolled. Duplicate invoices, gate log copies, witness statements from Harlan and Mrs. Dobbins, freight dates impossible by rail schedule. She tapped the stack. Enough to force inquiry. If they read it, they will. You trust officials more than I do. I trust embarrassment. Men in the office fear it. He glanced at her. You've met many men in the office. Enough. By noon the sun beat hard. Dust coated their tongues. They watered the horses at a shallow creek lined with cottonwoods and ate cold biscuits in the shade. Eli checked harness buckles while Clara stretched her stiff legs. You favor your side, she said. It's nothing. You use that phrase too often. It keeps returning useful. She crossed to him before he could step away and laid a hand against the bandaged ribs through his shirt. Heat. Tightness. He went still as struck iron. You tore it open. I noticed. You noticed bleeding? I noticed you touching me. The words hung between them, plain and dangerous. Her hand withdrew first. Sit. He obeyed without argument, which unsettled her more than resistance would have. She replaced the dressing with brisk competence and refused to examine why her fingers shook once when smoothing the cloth. They made camp that night beside a stand of juniper where the land dipped enough to break the wind. Eli tended the horses. Clara lit the cook fire. Darkness gathered cleanly in the open country, bringing stars in impossible numbers. Supper was beans warmed in a pot and coffee strong enough to wake old sins. Eli sat across the flames, hat tipped back, forearms resting on his knees. Firelight gentled the severity of his face without erasing it. "You were educated," he said. "It was not a question. My father taught at a small academy in Missouri. Then how did you come to Dry Creek?" "My father died. My brother inherited his debts and his temper. A widower out west wrote that he needed a wife and valued learning." Whitmore. "Yes?" The fire settled inward with a soft collapse. "I'm sorry," Eli said. She looked up sharply. "For which part?" "All of it. No one had offered that before. Pity she had received, advice in barrels, judgment by the wagon load, but not sorrow cleanly given and left unclaimed." "And you?" she asked. "Your wife?" He watched the flames a long time before speaking. "Anna died, birthing our son." Clara's breath caught. The boy lived 3 hours. His voice remained leveled by force, not ease. Afterwards, every room in the house sounded wrong. So I worked outside it. The wind moved through the juniper branches with a hush like distant surf. "I am sorry," she said. He nodded once, accepting as he had offered. Later, bedrolls were laid on opposite sides of the dying fire. Clara stared upward at stars sharp enough to cut. Sleep came slowly. Near midnight, hoofbeats woke her. She sat up at once. Eli was already standing, rifle in hand. 3 riders emerged from the dark ridgeline, faces shadowed, hats low. They did not approach close enough for names. "Evening," called the lead rider. "Keep riding," Eli answered. The man laughed. "Road's free country, camp isn't." The riders spread slightly. Clara's gaze dropped to their horses. Mercer sold feed, seed, tools, and favors. These men wore hired caution like a coat. "We only seek conversation," the lead rider said. "You found enough." The second rider dismounted halfway. Eli lifted the rifle to his shoulder, not rushed, not theatrical, back on the horse. The man froze. Clara rose beside the wagon seat where the document case lay hidden beneath blankets. If this was about papers, she would not lose them to brute men under borrowed moonlight. The lead rider spat. "Mercer says Boone's grown soft. Mercer says many things from behind counters. For one taut second, she thought gunfire would split the night. Then, the lead rider tugged his reins. The county seat's a long road. Shame if wheels broke," heeled his horse. The others followed. They vanished into darkness as quickly as they had formed from it. Only when hoofbeats faded did Eli lower the rifle. "You know them?" Clara asked. "No, but you know the type." "Yes." He checked the traces, then the wheels, then the horses again. "You should sleep," he said. "You first." He almost smiled, stubborn, consistent. Morning found one harness strap sliced nearly through. Had they driven at speed, it would have snapped on the descent to the river crossing. Eli held the leather in his fist without expression. Clara felt anger rise hot and clarifying. Good. Evidence that they tampered, that they're afraid. They reached Carson County by late afternoon. The county seat dwarfed Dry Creek, brick buildings, wider streets, telegraph wires, wagons from 3 states, people too busy to care who stared at whom. The courthouse stood white-pillared and severe above stone steps. Inside, clerks moved with practiced indifference until Clara began laying documents on a polished desk in perfect order. "Fraudulent charges across multiple accounts," she said. "Suppression of filed review records, witness intimidation on public roads." The senior clerk, a woman with steel spectacles and no patience for nonsense, looked up fully for the first time. "Names, Amos Mercer of Dry Creek, and you are?" "Mrs. Clara Boone." The clerk's pen paused. "Relation to claimant Eli Boone," Clara answered before thought could soften it. "His wife." Eli, standing beside her, turned his head slightly at the sound of it. By dusk, they had sworn statements before a magistrate and secured an emergency stay against seizure, pending formal inquiry. Copies sealed, orders dispatched by wire. When they stepped back into the street, the strain of days loosened so suddenly Clara swayed. Eli caught her elbow. "It's done," she said. "The first part is." Rain began unexpectedly, warm summer rain tapping stone and hat brims. The inn across the square had 1 room left. "1 room," the proprietor said. "Convention in town." Clara and Eli spoke at once. "We'll take it. We'll find another." The proprietor shrugged, then find quickly. There was no time, no appetite for pride, and no second vacancy within sight. The room held one bed, one washstand, one chair, and curtains thin as excuses. Rain whispered at the window. The air smelled of soap and old pine. Clara set her valise down carefully. "I can take the floor," Eli said. "You will do no such thing with torn ribs. I've slept in worse places. I do not doubt it. You may take the chair." He removed his hat. Generous. She should have laughed. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of every inch of space, every shared breath in the small room. Outside, thunder rolled far away. Inside, silence gathered close. Then someone tried the door handle. The latch rattled once, then harder. Eli crossed the room before the second shake ended. He put one hand behind Clara without touching her, and the other on the rifle propped beside the washstand. "Occupied," he said. A man's voice answered through the wood, slurred by drink. "Wrong door." Bootsteps staggered away down the hall. Neither moved for a moment. Then Eli slid the bolt into place and stood listening until silence returned. "You travel armed to bedchambers often?" Clara asked, because speech was easier than pulse. "Often enough." He set the rifle back against the wall and turned. The room seemed smaller now than when they entered. Rain tapped steadily at the pane. Water from his hat brim darkened the floorboards where he had dropped it by the chair. Clara drew a breath. "You should have the bed." "No. You are injured. You are exhausted. That is not the same argument. It is tonight." She folded her arms. "I will not sleep while you sit upright out of misplaced gallantry." "It isn't gallantry." "What is it then?" His gaze held hers. Firelight from the hallway under the door made a narrow gold line across the floor between them. Control. The answer stripped all ornament from the matter. She understood too well. The bed was not about courtesy. It was about proximity. About what one mattress in one room might ask of two people already altered by months of labor, fear, and restraint. "Very well," she said. "Then we shall share it and preserve your precious control by sleeping like civilized strangers." Something shifted in his face, alarm, perhaps, hidden beneath stillness. Clara. The second time her name had sounded like touch. "We are married before God, county, and half the gossiping territory," she said. "If you fear scandal now, you are late." Without waiting for reply, she removed her boots, crossed to the washstand, and loosened the pins from her hair. It fell over her shoulders in a dark spill she usually kept bound for practicality's sake. When she glanced at him through the mirror, he had gone very still. She changed behind the screen into her nightdress, then slid beneath the blanket and turned to the wall, heart behaving like a fool. After a long minute, she heard the chair creak. Then another minute. Then the chair creaked again as weight left it. The bed dipped carefully behind her. He lay on top of the blanket at first, fully clothed save boots, as if ready to flee at dawn or disaster. Space remained between them, wide as doctrine. "You may use the blanket," she said into the darkness. "I'm fine. You are stubborn." "Yes." She almost smiled into the pillow. Sleep did not come easily. Every sound sharpened, the rain, the settling frame, the measured breath at her back. She was aware of his warmth without contact, of the impossible fact that safety and danger could share a shape. At some unknown hour, thunder cracked close overhead. Clara woke with a start and turned instinctively. Her hand landed against his chest. He woke at once, catching her wrist before thought entered either of them. His grip was firm, not rough. Beneath her palm, his heart struck hard and fast. They stayed like that in the dark. Then he released her slowly. "Storm only," he said, voice low and altered by sleep. "Yes." Neither moved away immediately. When morning came gray and damp, they dressed with the exaggerated efficiency of people pretending nothing had occurred. At the courthouse, the magistrate reviewed affidavits while clerks copied orders. A telegraph response from Dry Creek awaited them by noon. Delivery of seizure notice suspended. Local constable instructed to secure Mercer records pending inquiry. Clara read the line twice. "He cannot destroy the books now." "He can still lie," Eli said. "Then we meet him with better memories." The return journey began under clearing skies. Yet 20 miles west of Carson, where the road narrowed through the Cottonwood Ravine, they found a wagon blocking the pass. No team attached. Just an empty freight wagon angled across the track. Eli reined in hard. "Stay here." He dismounted and approached on foot, hand near his holster. Clara scanned the ridges. Too quiet. No birds. Eli. The warning came with movement. 2 men rose from the brush on the left bank. Another from behind the wagon. Not guns first. Clubs. Mercer wanted delay more than murder. The first man swung at Eli's shoulder. Eli caught the blow on his forearm and drove his fist into the attacker's throat. The second rushed low. They went down together in dust. The third climbed toward the driver's seat where Clara sat. She snatched the brake lever free, a heavy iron bar, and swung as he reached for the reins. It caught his wrist with a crack. He howled. "Get down, widow! I'm not a widow!" She struck him again, this time across the temple. He dropped into the road. By then, Eli had thrown the second man clear and was on his feet. Blood ran from his brow. He seized the remaining attacker by the coat and slammed him against the wagon wheel hard enough to shake the spokes. "Who sent you?" The man spat blood. Eli tightened once. "Who?" "Mercer," the man gasped, "said hold you till nightfall." Eli let him fall. Clara jumped down from the seat. "Your head." "It's fine. It is bleeding into your eye. That's not the worst of it." He looked at the man she had felled with the brake lever. The fellow groaned and curled around his own pain. Eli's mouth changed at one corner. "Remind me not to block your road." They shoved the freight wagon aside, cut loose the hidden horse tethered in brush, and drove on fast. By dusk they reached home. Tommy ran from the yard shouting before the wheel stopped. Harlan followed, face grim. "Constable came," Harlan said. "Mercer locked his office and claimed records were stolen." "By whom?" Clara asked. "By no one he could name. Mrs. Dobbins appeared on the porch carrying a skillet like a weapon, and he's been telling town you trapped Boone into this marriage for land." Clara felt the insult less than the calculation behind it. Attack her legitimacy, weaken her testimony. Eli climbed down from the wagon slowly. Blood dried at his temple, dust on every seam. "Where is he now?" he asked. "In town," Harlan said. Eli started for the barn. Clara caught his sleeve. "No, he hired men on the road." "Yes, which is why he wants you angry." His jaw locked. "He wants fists," she said. "We bring paper." "I'm tired of paper." "So am I." "Use it anyway." The yard had gone quiet around them. Even Tommy understood something weighty was passing between the 2 figures by the wagon wheel. Eli looked at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. "What if paper fails?" "Then we fail having been right. That enough for you?" "No," her voice lowered. "But losing yourself would be worse." Wind moved through the cottonwoods near the creek. Somewhere a horse stamped in its stall. At last he exhaled. "Tomorrow," he said. "Yes." He took one step toward the house, then stopped and turned back. In front of Harlan, Tommy, Mrs. Dobbins, and the whole watching yard, he lifted Clara's hand from his sleeve and held it once, openly, before letting go. No declaration, no speech, yet every witness understood it. And so did she. Morning came hot and windless, the kind of heat that made tempers rise before the sun reached noon. Dry Creek's main street filled early. Wagons lined the hitching rails. Men drifted toward the courthouse steps with the aimless posture of those who claimed errands and came for spectacle. Women gathered beneath awnings with baskets they had no need to carry. The news had done its work in the night. Amos Mercer stood near the doors in a black coat despite the heat, composed as a banker in church. Beside him, the local constable shifted uneasily. On the other side of the street, Mrs. Vale watched with narrowed eyes. Clara climbed from the wagon carrying the ledgers against her ribs. Eli came around to her side, not touching, merely near enough to be felt. Inside, the hearing room smelled of dust, ink, and old pine benches. The county magistrate from Carson sat at the front table with 2 clerks and an expression that suggested impatience for liars. Mercer spoke first. He called the charges confusion, frontier bookkeeping, misremembered dates, malicious invention from debtors seeking escape. Then Clara rose. She laid one ledger open, then another beside it, pages marked with neat slips of paper. Her voice carried cleanly through the room. Transport charged on goods collected in person, interest applied before due dates, duplicate seed invoices in separate months for one delivery. and here, storage fees for cattle sold the same week they were listed as housed. The magistrate leaned forward. Mercer's smile began to thin. She called Harlan, who named dates from memory stronger than any receipt. Mrs. Dobbins followed and testified with relish that Mercer had tried to frighten widows before and found them poor prey. Even Tommy, hat twisting in his hands, identified one of the hired men who had bought feed at the Mercantile the morning before the road attack. At last, the magistrate turned to Mercer. "Do you deny employing men to delay these claimants?" "I deny every slander spoken here." The rear door opened. A bruised man entered holding his hat in both hands. The rider Clara had struck with the brake lever. The room stirred. He would not meet her eyes. "Mercer paid us $10 each." Silence fell hard. The magistrate removed his spectacles. "That will do." The ruling came an hour later. Fraud confirmed pending full audit. All claims against Boone Ranch suspended. Illicit charges voided. Mercer's account seized. Further criminal inquiry to follow. Mercer looked suddenly smaller than his coat. When people rose from the benches, the room broke into low voices like rain starting on a roof. Some stared at Clara with surprise, others with something closer to respect. Outside, sunlight blazed on the street. Clara stood still on the courthouse steps, the papers in her hand trembling now that danger had passed. "It's finished," she said. "No," Eli answered. She turned. He had removed his hat. Wind moved through his hair, dust marked his boots, and healing bruises colored his brow and ribs. He looked like every hard mile that had brought them there. "I asked you for a year," he said. "I asked for law and convenience and time. I was wrong in every measure that mattered." The street quieted around them. "I do not want a contract from you now. I do not want gratitude. I want what came after. Your voice in my house, your hands in my ledgers, your boots by my door. I want to wake and know you chose to stay." Her throat tightened painfully. "Clara Boone," he said, and this time her name held no caution at all. "Will you keep being my wife?" There was no performance in him, no flourish, only plain truth, earned the hard way. "Yes," she said at once. Relief crossed his face so swiftly and so nakedly that she loved him for that more than anything spoken. He stepped close, touched her cheek with work-rough fingers as if handling something precious, then kissed her once under the open sky. By evening they were home. The porch boards held the day's warmth. The repaired roof stood solid overhead. Far out in the pasture, cattle moved like dark brushstrokes through gold light. Inside, bread cooled on the kitchen table, and the clock still lied about the hour. Clara sat beside him on the top step while dusk gathered over the plains. For the first time in many years, nothing was owed.